Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Software Plaza podcast. I'm Twain Taylor, editor at Software Plaza, and we want to bring you what's happening today in the CNCF ecosystem and everything around Kubernetes, cloud native. That's what we care about. And I'm really excited about today's conversation. We're going to be talking to Kat Cosgrove, who's an elected member of the Kubernetes Steering Committee at CNCF. So she's really involved with the high-level decision making at CNCF, one of which we're going to be fleshing out in today's conversation. And she's also developer advocate at Minimus. Uh, and Minimus, let me just read what's on their website and how they call themselves as it's a secure minimal container images. Hundreds of images, almost zero CVEs. So safe container images. But today our conversation is not going to be centered around Minimus. It's going to be about something that is happening, is going to happen in the space, which is kind of got some people nervous, got a lot of people talking on LinkedIn, Twitter, about just what this means. We're talking about the Ingress NGINX and it being retired. It's a very widely used open source tool that's become kind of like integral part of the Kubernetes ecosystem. And for reasons which we'll be talking about, the project will not be maintained starting, I think, a month from now, around March 1st or March 26th. I don't know, end of March, early March, I don't know. Kat, would you happen to know the exact date?
We're going to retire it at KubeCon Amsterdam, so the end of March.
Okay, end of March. All right. So yeah, just about 2 months. And so that's what we're going to talk about. So Kat was part of this decision at CNCF to retire the project, and that's what we wanted to talk about. Before we get into that, though, Kat, tell us a bit about yourself, just your journey so
Sure.
far in tech, and just your path to doing what you do now.
Sure. So a long, long time ago, I was a just a software engineer at JFrog. I was on their like weird little IoT team. We weren't working on like a paid product of JFrog's. We were building like proofs of concept that could maybe turn into products. And in building one of those, I had to learn how to use Kubernetes, but we were an embedded Linux team. So we were using K3s. Can't really recommend that as a way to learn how to use Kubernetes. It takes a lot of shortcuts for you that you wouldn't take
Okay.
with full flavored Kubernetes, but I do still think
Hmm.
K3s is an extremely cool tool, just not a great way to learn Kubernetes for the first time.
Hmm.
Um, but that was my first exposure to the project. I wasn't a contributor then, I was just a user.
Hmm.
And as my career kind of evolved from a software engineer to a developer advocate at a few different companies, um, I kind of got more involved in Kubernetes as a project. The first time I contributed was in handling the dramatic fallout from us deprecating the Docker shim, which was a little software shim that allowed you to use the entire Docker tech stack as your container runtime. Uh,
Hmm.
it was hard to maintain. It was a nightmare. So we deprecated it, and the public fallout was pretty significant. We underestimated how dramatic that would be. And I got called in to write a bunch of content to
Hmm.
help explain what was going on. And from there, I
Hmm.
kind of just like didn't leave the project. And
Hmm.
being a Kubernetes contributor stayed with me from job to job to job. I was on the Kubernetes release team for several years. I was the release lead for Kubernetes version 130. Now I am the release team sub project owner. So I'm ultimately responsible for releasing Kubernetes 3 times a year. I'm a technical lead for SIG docs, so I'm also responsible for the maintenance of the Kubernetes documentation and the Kubernetes website. And this year, well, last year, technically, I was elected as a member of the Kubernetes Steering Committee, which is the board of 7 people that is responsible for like driving the future of the project. The CNCF doesn't actually really get to tell us what to do. Kubernetes gets to govern itself for the most part. We have CNCF
Hmm.
resources, of course, but we govern ourselves in the overwhelming majority of decisions, including this one to shut down Ingress NGINX. That is not the CNCF's call. Um, but I'm very, very lucky as a Kubernetes maintainer in that being a Kubernetes maintainer is part of my day job. So I'm head of developer advocacy at Minimus now, but a significant portion of my actual job for Minimus is being a Kubernetes maintainer. The overwhelming majority of contributors and maintainers are doing this for free in their spare time outside of their normal working hours. They're working a full-time job and then contributing to Kubernetes out of the goodness of their hearts. And that's true for open source in general, which
Hmm.
ended up being part of the problem with Ingress NGINX.
Yeah, wow, wow. Some interesting things you mentioned there, which kind of gives us a good backdrop to this conversation as well. Just the first time you handled deprecating a feature and how there's a backlash you mentioned. What were some of the lessons you got from that you still remember that probably are relevant today?
We're applying a lot of those lessons learned right now. This interview is part of applying those lessons learned.
Hmm.
When we deprecated the Docker shim, we grossly overestimated what the average person understood about the relationship between Kubernetes and Docker, both Docker the company and Docker the tool. So there were quite a lot of very scared like regular software engineers who used Docker, as in like they wrote Docker files as part of their engineering jobs. And because they didn't understand the relationship between Kubernetes and Docker, they thought that this meant we were functionally killing the effectiveness of Docker as a tool, which is not true. Um, what the what Docker produces when you build an image is an OCI compliant container image. And that's all Kubernetes cares about, that you're handing in an OCI compliant container image. Um,
Hmm.
Podman produces the same thing. So you can still use Docker as a tool. You just couldn't use the entire Docker tech stack as your runtime instead of using containerd directly, which is what the Docker shim was trying to get at inside of the Docker tech stack. So today, with handling this Ingress NGINX shutdown, we are erring on the side of caution in a very extreme way and over explaining absolutely everything. We are not making assumptions about what the person reading a particular statement or blog article understands where we can, which I think will be helpful. We're also not just dropping a PR out of nowhere that deprecates it. Announcements were made in advance. We made an announcement at KubeCon in Atlanta last November, and we issued another statement this morning as a joint statement from the steering committee and the security response committee. So we're giving people a lot of very clear warnings. There is no fluff or beating around the bush this time. We're being very explicit that like this is an emergency. This is not something that you can wait until the last minute to address. This is something that requires engineering time to get around, and you need to start working on it now. Whereas with the original Docker shim deprecation announcement, it was just a PR. I think it was just an issue
Hmm.
and a PR that put a deprecation warning into Kubernetes,
Wow.
which is not a great way to handle it. So
Hmm.
this time we are
All right, all right.
communicating well in advance with way more information.
Hmm. Hmm. And what was the aftermath, apart from like the sudden announcement? What was the aftermath in terms of, people coping, making changes? Um, you know, um, How was that the last time around? What were some of the lessons from then? Was it easier than people expected? What was the reality?
Yeah, so with the Docker shim issue, it for the overwhelming majority of users of cluster administrators, the switch was really easy. It's just you just switch to a different container runtime. You switch to using just containerd instead of using all of Docker or Cryo or whatever your container runtime of choice was. It was a
Hmm.
relatively, it still required some work, obviously, but it was a relatively low effort thing.
Okay.
Like this was something that you could handle in a couple of days,
Okay.
except for in like very, very rare circumstances where some cluster admins were doing, for lack of a better word, weird stuff with Docker. Like I think
Mm-hmm.
if you were running Docker in Docker, there was some work to be done with that switch. That is not true for the Ingress NGINX shutdown, unfortunately. There is no drop-in replacement. For Docker shim, there were close to drop-in replacements. It's just switching runtimes. For this, absolutely not. There is no drop-in replacement. The
Hmm.
recommended path is to switch to Gateway API, but
Okay.
Gateway API approaches the issue of navigating traffic around backends in a fundamentally different way than Ingress NGINX did. So absolutely, you have to do work for this. It is not something that can be handled in a day or two. It is something that requires fairly
Yeah.
significant labor, no matter which
Yeah.
option you go with. There are some options that are a little closer to a drop-in replacement, but they are still using Ingress. They're third-party Ingress controllers, and little closer to not
Hmm.
a whole lot of work, but it is still work. There is no automated way to do this. There's not um, full-fledged tooling that will do it for you. There is an open source project called Ingress 2 Gateway that is being actively developed. They had a release a couple of weeks ago, and that will automate some of the annotations for you, but not all of them,
Okay.
which is
Okay.
just a result of Ingress NGINX being so flexible, unfortunately.
Hmm. All right. Interesting. I want to read your LinkedIn post from a couple of weeks ago, or a
Sure.
couple of months maybe, on this issue when I guess it was announced. You said the Ingress NGINX deprecation is the inevitable result of the fundamentally broken way for-profit companies consume open source software,
Mhm.
not a reflection on the state of the CNCF or Kubernetes. It had to happen. The maintainers had been loudly begging for help for years and got none, even though a significant percentage of cloud native environments rely on the tool. Wanted to dig into this a bit. Talk to us
Mhm.
about just the warning signs and what you noticed when you said that the maintainers were begging for help for years. Tell us a bit about that, the things you noticed, and the state of just the maintainers.
So there wasn't really even, it wasn't just noticing things, they were publicly begging for help. The earliest example I could find was an email to dev at Kubernetes.io, which is our largest mailing list, straight up begging for contributors. And that was in 2022. So for anybody who's been paying attention, this is not a surprise. They have repeatedly asked for help via the mailing list, via talks at KubeCon, via every avenue they have to try to get a hold of potential contributors. And even though roughly 50% of cloud native environments directly rely on Ingress NGINX, many of them large for-profit vendors, they got nothing. And that is the sad reality of being an open source maintainer sometimes. People don't want to help. They just want your labor for free. I don't believe that that's sustainable at all, since again, most of us are doing this in our free time. Most of us are not being paid to do this. I'm an outlier in that I'm being paid to do this, but the Ingress NGINX maintainers weren't. There were only two of them, two people responsible for maintaining something that 50% of cloud native environments rely directly on, and nobody wants to help them. And they're doing it entirely in their spare time. Both of those guys have day jobs that don't allow them to work on Ingress NGINX. So we're not the first project this has happened to. We won't be the last. Fortunately, we have the ability to handle it gracefully, right? We're a very large project and we can handle it gracefully, but smaller projects simply don't have that luxury, and it's a security problem. When you only have one or two maintainers for a critical piece of infrastructure, they're tired, they're burned out, they don't have the time to respond quickly, and it opens projects up to being attacked. We've seen it happen before. We will see it happen again. Um, and it sucks. I think that big companies that rely on open source projects to make money have a moral responsibility and a responsibility to their own users as a security measure to contribute back. They just do.
Right.
And when they don't, this is what happens.
Yeah, yeah. I want to ask for someone who's probably in this, probably working, on something in the space, but probably isn't, as up to date on what this means and why it's so important. Could you kind of probably should have started with this, but
Yeah,
why is this so big? What does it mean for these organizations that actually use Ingress NGINX in their
yeah.
production environments? What will it mean if it's not going to be maintained after March, from April onwards? What's changing? What's at stake?
Sure. So Ingress NGINX is a tool that allows you to direct traffic to various backends within a Kubernetes cluster. When something like Ingress NGINX is penetrated, like if some hacker manages to gain control of your Ingress controller, uh, or gain access to your Ingress controller, that person has potentially, depending on the exploit, an extremely dangerous level of access to your cluster, to your application, and potentially to user data. So it's a thing that's very, very important to keep secure. And we can't maintain it anymore. We can't keep on top of security issues within Ingress NGINX. The flexibility it was originally designed with, the fundamental architecture of it, means that it is more vulnerable to CVEs.
Mhm.
And we can't stay on top of them anymore. We don't have the people for it. And honestly, like architecturally, it's become such a mess. Like the technical debt has piled up that even if resources did materialize, there's nothing we can do. We are shutting it down. Um, but what this means for cluster administrators and users is you absolutely 1000% have to switch to something else. Uh, Ideally by the time we shut it down, but if not, shortly thereafter, because we are not going to maintain it anymore. We are going to archive the repository. There will be no more releases. There will be no more security patches. It doesn't matter what vulnerability is publicly disclosed in Ingress NGINX. It could be a straight 10 CVSS score with remote code execution, and we are not going to fix it. So if you choose to remain with Ingress NGINX after the shutdown, you are choosing to be vulnerable to any CVE that is publicly disclosed for Ingress NGINX in the future. Um, Existing installations of Ingress NGINX will continue to work. We're not going to like remotely shut down the project. Like, frankly, that's not a thing we can do. So if you're already running on it, it will continue to work after the shutdown, which means that you may not know that you're affected by this shutdown until it's too late, until you've been compromised. Unless you are proactive about it, check to see whether or not you're relying on Ingress NGINX. And if you are, begin moving to something else.
Mm-hmm. All right, all right. Wow, that's pretty clear.
Yeah.
I want to ask about just why certain projects get abandoned or get less attention, and why some do. Because obviously, even the for-profit companies dedicate a certain percentage of their resources to open source projects, and there are
Mhm.
probably reasons for that. But just talk to us a bit about just how that allocation happens. How much resources are we okay with dedicating to open source, and which projects we want to commit to and which we're not going to commit to. Give us a bit of what you've noticed in terms of like the culture or how the decisions are made
Mhm.
regarding how much resources a for-profit company wants to dedicate to open source.
So I think in choosing what gets resources, honestly, I think a lot of it comes down to what is flashier, like what can they also use for PR.
Yeah.
Contributing to Kubernetes itself is flashier than contributing to Ingress NGINX, which is a
Hmm.
teeny tiny sub project, but it's still critical, but it's a teeny tiny sub project. So saying that you've got Ingress NGINX contributors or Ingress NGINX maintainers is not as flashy as saying that you've got Kubernetes maintainers. So
Hmm.
some of it I think is just a PR move,
Hmm.
and that sucks. A lot of really really tiny but very much integral projects get ignored because of that. There's an XKCD comic of this where it's, like a tower of blocks being held up by this like one teeny little block in the lower right
Hmm.
hand corner. And that one teeny little block is some very, very small open source utility that's maintained by one guy, right? And when that one falls over, the whole tower collapses. Nobody thinks about contributing to that one teeny tiny little utility. They want to contribute to the big, huge one in the middle because that's the one that gets you media attention. That's the one that gets
Hmm.
you flashy speaking slots at big conferences or whatever. So unfortunately, I think some of it is that Kubernetes
Hmm.
is just better
Well,
PR than Ingress NGINX. Um, and
and
that's,
I think
I don't know,
for like,
requires a thinking shift in
mm,
companies, but
I think even for like the developers themselves, like on your resume, it's
yep,
flashier, yeah, Kubernetes contributor.
totally.
Um, yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. And so I'm wondering what other projects do you think uh, kind of have a similar fate that probably are on the radar that people should watch out for if in case they already, using those and they committed to that, they should probably watch out for that as well. Anything that's on your mind?
Uh, Not anything specific, but like any small project is
Yeah.
susceptible to this. So like look at your dependencies. Like, are you also relying on some like ultra tiny tool? Go check out the health of that project. Does it only have three maintainers in spite of the fact that it's got like 30,000 GitHub stars or whatever? That's something that you should consider looking at. I think any responsible company should be actively looking at the health of the open source projects that they rely on, especially if you're like making money off of these projects or it's like somehow integral to your paid product. You should be monitoring the health of your dependencies. And if one of those dependencies appears to be unhealthy or trending towards being unhealthy, you have the assets to fix that. I don't think that you need to hire an entire engineering team and dedicate that engineering team exclusively to working on some open source project, but presumably you have an engineering team already. So devote a few hours a week of one engineer's time or two engineers' time, depending on, the size of the project and what you're trying to accomplish, but lend them some engineering time. Anytime you find that you rely on a project that is maybe less healthy than you would like, help fix it. This is a community,
Mhm.
this is a collective effort. Open source software is inherently more secure and more stable than proprietary software. We can move faster, we can resolve problems more quickly. We benefit from a more diverse selection of engineers, so our ideas are just faster and better. Um, and if you want to keep benefiting from how much better open source software is than closed source software, then you have to actively participate in it. You don't get to, we don't like giving away free rides, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. I want to read one of the comments on your LinkedIn post from Jacob Scholes, who says, but how exactly should it work for projects that are mostly used directly by many end users rather than consumed through vendors, which
Mhm.
seems like the case for Ingress NGINX? When you're an end user company that makes a profit from using tens or even hundreds of small open source projects, question mark. So yeah, it's basically bringing up a difference between, projects that are used primarily like this, being used primarily by end users rather than vendors. Anything that you'd like to comment on, just talking about that difference and that nuance? Does, anything at all that you'd like to uh, chime in there?
I still think that they have a moral obligation to contribute back. You're
Mm-hmm.
making money off of the collective free work of some number of people. Give back in some way. It doesn't have to be engineering hours if you don't have the time or the team or the resources to do that. Many open source projects accept monetary donation. You can sponsor through GitHub, and we use that money to pay for things like hosting or hiring a technical writer or hiring engineers on contracts for things. So there is still a way to give back if you can't give engineering resources, but being an end user does not absolve you of the responsibility to help maintain the ecosystem from which you are profiting.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. All right. Interesting. I wanted to segue talking about just migration, and you mentioned Gateway API as the recommended option.
Yeah,
Are there any, I'm guessing that's one of the open source projects as well. Are there any,
yeah,
I think I saw in, I think one of the announcements, I think Kong and a couple of other vendors as well have solutions.
yep.
So yeah, could you probably mention a few of those as well? Are they options? What are they like?
There's Yeah, there are a ton of third-party ingress controllers. They're listed in the Kubernetes documentation, even um, in alphabetical order. I think there's like 30 of them or 40. Every vendor imaginable has a third-party ingress controller. I think the Cilium one is pretty popular,
Mm-hmm.
but like we don't really recommend one of those over any of the others. We have a policy of not being kingmakers, air quotes. So we're not going to specifically recommend one third-party ingress controller over another. We're going to recommend the open
Sure.
source option that's part of the CNCF ecosystem, which is Gateway API, and
Mm-hmm.
is fundamentally going about the problem of directing traffic between backends in a different way than Ingress did. All of the
Mm-hmm.
third-party Ingress controllers are using Ingress in some way. So they're sort of behaving like Ingress NGINX. But any of those are a perfectly fine option if they're easier for you to drop in than Gateway API. If you're already within that third party's ecosystem, perfectly reasonable choice to use their Ingress controller instead of Ingress NGINX directly. But you do have quite a lot of options.
Okay, okay. That's great to know. Wow, that's a huge number of vendors. I didn't know that there's 30 of them.
Yeah, there's a lot.
Yeah. So I want to ask about just, looking ahead, what are some of the lessons from this that you'd say is informing the way things work with open source, with the CNCF, with governance and the decisions being made by the steering committee? Uh,
Mhm.
what are some of what does this mean for like how open source is governed in the next couple of years, let's say?
I mean, ultimately, both my job as a member of the steering committee and the security response committee's job is to protect both our users and our contributors. We made this decision because keeping Ingress NGINX on life support functionally was not the best choice for the safety and security and sustainability of our own contributors and our users. Like we have to think about both. Um, I think Kubernetes is at a spot where we kind of have to accept that We're enormous now. We're a critical piece of infrastructure for uh, a frankly terrifying amount of the world's digital infrastructure. And we have to act like it. So even though this decision is hard and dramatic, and it's going to cause a lot of work for people, it is the right move in the best interest of our own community, our users, and our users' customers. Part of what we were elected for is to deal with the heat when we have to make decisions like this. So I'm sure all of us are going to be doing a lot of these interviews and answering very difficult questions about why we did this. But that is part of the job, and we will be keeping that very close in mind for the future. Between this and the Docker shim deprecation, we've definitely learned to over communicate
Mhm.
well in advance to not make any assumptions about what the person reading a particular update understands, because we are no longer a tiny community. Like our
Yeah.
we're not just our own users anymore. For a long
Mhm.
time, all of the Kubernetes users were also Kubernetes contributors, or at least
Mhm.
most of them, and that just isn't true anymore. We're the second largest open source project in the world behind Linux.
Wow.
So it's a big responsibility, and that's something that we're very careful to keep in mind now.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, wow. Last question I have for you, Kat, is just yeah, just zooming out from just this particular topic
Mhm.
to about Kubernetes and things you just mentioned. What does the year look like? What are you most excited about as you look ahead uh, in what's happening in the space, developments, any new features, or just any new decisions you're part of? Or anything at all that you sense is happening in the space that excites you. What would you say is one thing you'd like to mention?
I think we're finally getting to a point with Kubernetes where it's like we can certainly call it mature now.
Hmm.
But we're at a point where we get to focus a little bit more on making Kubernetes easier to use and easier to interact with than just cramming more features into it. Of course, we are constantly developing new features. The average release has something like 40 to 60 enhancements in it. But now some of those enhancements get to be about usability, about just making Kubernetes easier to interact with. And I think that's really cool. For a long time, we've had a reputation for being very difficult, right? Kubernetes
Okay.
is hard to use,
Hmm.
but it's getting significantly easier to use. We're able to focus some like time and effort on abstractions that make Kubernetes easier to interact with. An example of that is KYAML, a Kubernetes flavor of YAML that makes it a little bit easier to interact with. We've had several pretty large enhancements over the last couple of years that standardize different ways to interact with Kubernetes, that make it less so that you have to be an expert just to touch it, which I think is
Hmm.
really, really, really cool. Because I would love to get away from the perception that Kubernetes is hard. Kubernetes is complex, but it
Hmm.
does not have to be hard, I think. And that is what I am most excited to see us do over the next couple of years. Just make it less of a pain to use.
Wow, interesting. Kind of reminds me of what you started when you said that, your first taste of Kubernetes was K3s, and
Yeah.
that wasn't the best. Uh, we And interesting that we're finishing on just that, Kubernetes should be made simpler. Uh, yeah, quite an interesting conversation. And I think, yeah, just thanks for just pointing out all of those things from, the previous Docker shin, the feature that got deprecated, connecting it to this, the lessons. And I think, yeah, definitely, like you said, you're over communicating. I mean, the whole, the team is over communicating and just, making it easy. And though there's a lot of discussions and fiery comments online, I think
Yeah.
that there seems to be a very clear path and there's a lot of options. It seems like, yeah, 30 vendors, that's quite a lot of options. So
Yeah,
uh, yeah, so thanks a lot for joining us today. Thanks for breaking it down piece by piece and just giving us exactly what this means and how to just approach this shift, though it sounds so big that it can actually be managed. Thanks a lot. Really appreciate it.
happy to.
All right, and we hope you enjoyed that, listeners and viewers. Do get in touch with Kat and check out what she's up to. Go check out Minimus if you're interested. That's minimus.io. And tune in for the next episode where we'll be talking about something similar. See you on that one. Bye bye.